Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
It's not going to help everyone, but it is, I hope, for plenty of people, at least going to open a little window, open a little door that makes them feel a little bit more like they can cope and respond to the pressures they're under rather than just react to the pressures that they're under. It gives you the space, it gives you the kind of capacity that when something's thrown at you, you've just got that bit more time to kind of catch it and move it on or move it sideways or just take it in with a tiny bit more perspective. But kids also know when you're trying to manipulate them and get them to do something so that they behave better. You know, they're bright. They can see through teachers. They have good, what I call a BS radar. You know, they know when why you're doing what you're doing more often than you might think.
The home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name's Mick Coyle and I'm going to be guiding you through today's programme where we are talking about mindfulness. Now, this is the first podcast of 2025. Mindfulness might be something you're thinking of introducing into your life this year, might be part of a new drive, and you might be thinking, how can I make it work? How can I make it something that's sustainable? And how can it be something that I can build into sort of everyday life? Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do in the conversation today is hopefully give you some insight into that, but also the benefits that you'll get from getting involved in mindfulness. With a brilliant guest, Richard Burnett, who is co-founder and chair of the Mindfulness in Schools project. And I'll get links to them up on our podcast notes because they do brilliant work working with children within schools, but also teachers within schools. And if you think about school environments and classroom environments as like a microcosm of the stresses and strains of everyday life, it's a really good place to put the focus on when we talk about introducing mindfulness, finding ways to bring it into a routine, and then seeing the benefits of it as well. And the Mindfulness in Schools projects have got some fantastic results over the years and continue to make difference to the lives of pupils and teachers, particularly those who are buying into the idea of mindfulness, who aren't just going, yeah, I'll sign up to this. They're actually saying, yeah, this is something I need in my life. This is something I think can make a difference. So Richard is going to explain the work that they do, how it can make a difference, and how you can build mindfulness into your experiences as well. I started off by asking him about what was it that schools were going through or experiencing that meant that they might contact an organisation like MISP and ask them for help to come in and introduce mindfulness into their classrooms.
Golly, that's a big question. I mean, lots of things, Mick. There's, I suppose, the first and most interesting thing perhaps is that they like to tell us about what's happening in their classrooms and what might be going wrong with the children that they're trying to teach. But what we tend to ask to begin with is, how are you? You know, how are you doing? Because actually the pressure on teachers is huge and the challenges they're facing are huge. And particularly with something like mindfulness, in a way, you know, it's that cliche. I know it is a cliche, so I'm sorry, but that thing about you can't pour from an empty cup. And if you are struggling yourself, either with your mental health or just, you know, staying on top of things, it's really hard for you to be there, to be present, to be available, if you like, for the pressures that the children themselves are facing. So there's kind of a thing there where we just begin with the teachers and help them look after themselves. And then what we hope is that their experience, and what we often find is that their experience of mindfulness, I don't know what your experience of mindfulness is, Mick, but that when they try it and they do it and it works, in inverted commas, it helps them, they think, okay, you know, they feel like they're in a better space. And then they get the bug, if you like, the enthusiasm to try and help their children with this.
No, absolutely. And we'll come on to mindfulness in itself as well, because I think it's a really important thing to sort of clarify by definition. But can I ask you, because you obviously get drafted in as a reaction to something that's going on. But
Yeah.
of course, so much around the world of mindfulness is about proaction instead. And I just wonder whether or not silver bullets are something that mindfulness can deliver, or whether or not you need to maybe be quite clear right from the start about what mindfulness can do from the bottom up, if you like.
Yeah, it isn't a silver bullet, Mick, and that's really important to say. And I wouldn't even say it's for everyone. You will get teachers who will come to you and they're struggling, and they might come on one of our courses and find it isn't their thing. It's not for them. So it's not gonna heal everyone. I don't like the word heal even, because that suggests there's some sort of illness of some kind. It's not gonna help everyone. But it is, I hope, for plenty of people, at least gonna open a little window, open a little door that makes them feel a little bit more like they can cope and respond to the pressures they're under, rather than just react to the pressures that they're under. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I'm keen to sort of tap into that idea that so much of what we do around mindfulness gives us helps us sort of reset, if you like,
Yes.
to build
Yeah.
from a better foundation. So often now in the world, we look for reactive things that can just solve everyone's problems straight away. But actually, it requires, doesn't it, mindfulness, a slightly bigger perspective, a mindset
Yeah.
shift about how you view yourself, your environment, and so on and so forth. And that, of course, takes a little bit of time to build in. It's not just a one day and we can solve everything
No.
kind of thing.
No, and that's a challenge that we face actually as an organization, as a charity, because a lot of people, particularly in the commercial sector, are sort of promising more silver bullet type approaches. Do this, take 30 seconds a day, and you'll be fine. And it as you say, Mick, it doesn't work like that at all. And you've probably heard of John Kabat-Zinn, who's one of the founding fathers, if you like, of secular mindfulness, and he talks about you've got to weave the parachute. You've got to just every day, just do a little bit so that when you fall, it's there to catch you. But if you don't weave that parachute, you can't expect it just to suddenly, sort out all the challenges that you're facing. But I think what it does is it gives you the space, it gives you the kind of capacity that when something's thrown at you, you just got that bit more time to kind of catch it and move it on, or move it sideways, or just take it in with a tiny bit more perspective. But you're right, that takes time. That takes time. And I think if you don't get used to just doing a little bit of mindfulness every day, it doesn't have to be, meditation necessarily. You don't have to sit like a statue for an hour every morning. It could be that, the walking the dog, the cup of tea in your hands, the looking out of the window, all of those sorts of things are little moments of mindfulness. And it does help when you sit, because I think sitting kind of gives you that discipline. But those other moments are absolutely crucial. It doesn't stop once you stop meditating. It doesn't you're suddenly not mindful. Carrying it into the world is one of the most important things.
When you sit down then with teachers, and we'll start with teachers, when you sit down with them and you're going to say, right, we're going to talk about mindfulness, what's the sort of the elevator pitch for them to buy into it relatively sharpish? Because you could start quoting papers and ideas and all these things, but I guess within a workshop environment, you've kind of got to say,
Yeah.
look, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to equip you with.
So, well, do you know what? I always just begin with the simplest of practices, which I don't know whether the radio is necessarily the best place to do it. But what I actually get them to do is I say, I'm going to count to three, I'm going to clap, and then we're going to clap together in that rhythm. 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to ask you to hold out your hands as if you're holding a football. And that, I mean, I might give a bit of background before, but what's fascinating about that is as soon as they hold out their hands, as soon as the blood's got flowing in their fingertips and their palms, because they've whacked their hands together like that, and I just say, okay, so just notice what's happening in your hands right now. What do you notice? Fizzing, tingling, pulsing, heat, warmth, it doesn't matter. But for most people, immediately that's like, ooh, that's interesting. I didn't know I could put my attention there. And then if you play with that and you say, okay, so just try tuning into your thumbs, without looking at them, seeing if you can pick out your thumbs with your attention. And they go, oh, I can direct my attention. And these are things that we were born with, but they've never been given any value. And then you say, what about the tip of your left fingertip? And immediately you've kind of got them doing it, feeling it. And then from there, the next step often I would go with is, have you seen Kung Fu Panda?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a beautiful scene in Kung Fu Panda, which, and I've been doing this for many, many years, Mick, and anybody who hears me, who heard me talk about this 20 years ago, they'll probably say, he's not still doing Kung Fu Panda, surely. But it's great. It's a fantastic description, because it's all about that thing that, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. And that's why it's called the present. And if you can connect that to those physical sensations that people have in their hands, that is the present moment. That is what's happening right now, here. And then suddenly they're doing it in a way. They're getting it, rather than just thinking, oh, it's this fluffy mindfulness stuff.
What does that do in terms of that connection that then enables you to take on a difficult class or go into an exam situation that's particularly stressful? How do you connect that idea and that sort of the notion around
Yes.
mindfulness and actually then the practicality within that educational environment?
Well, I suppose the way you would do that with a child is give them something to do when they're standing outside the exam hall feeling terrified. They need to know why. I mean, part of the curricula we've written is explaining how the brain works and how the body works. If they're feeling sick, or if they're feeling like they need to, go to the loo, it helps them to understand why. Why do I feel like I need to go to the toilet when I'm nervous for my exam? And you explain it's because of fight or flight. It's because, when we're animals and we're being chased, we need to evacuate everything. We need to get rid of everything in our bowels and bladders, so we're lighter, so we can move more quickly. So it's less scary that they're feeling these feelings that feel strange, if you like. But then you give them something to do, and that might be a really simple exercise. So there's a breathing exercise, which we call a 7-11, which is when you breathe in, you just you fit the numbers 1 to 7 to the length of the in breath. So, and then on the out breath, you fit the numbers 1 to 11 to the full length of the out breath. And it just means that it brings them into feeling the breathing in their body, and anchoring their mind to the breathing. And then you might say, okay, feel your feet on the floor. We have various practices. There's one which we call feet, FOFBAR, feet on floor, bum on chair. And if they're in the exam room and they're sitting in front of that paper that they've not been told to open yet because the exam hasn't started, and they're feeling even more terrified, FOFBAR, feet on floor, feel your feet on the floor, bum on chair, feel the weight of your body on the chair, notice your breathing. So you're giving them tactics that they can deploy in the moment when they feel those feelings that they're going to feel, because we all feel them.
Even just having this conversation, Richard, when you mentioned, thumbs and things like that, and it's something I've noticed by sort of going through some of these practices, is how tense our bodies often are. That if you suddenly go think of your thumb, you realize when you're thinking of your thumb, you're actually holding it quite like stiffly, or you're tensing it. I often find this if I'm lying in bed at night, I'm thinking I can't get to sleep at all, and I'm tossing and I realize that my whole body is like stiff, and I just have to go, oh, I need to. But you have to almost. Well, I go from my big toe and work my way up my body to sort of go, but you have to, my brain, there's not like a magical bullet around this. My brain has to say, relax, and then relax that bit. And then I realize, and I feel it flow. And it's quite strange that I think, why have I been wasting the energy it takes to hold my body tensely? But obviously that's part of maybe a thought process I was having, or maybe something I was worrying about, or something, but it's only when you give yourself the space for your body to relax and command it to relax, or command it to understand, that you suddenly go, ah, right. That kind of makes
So we call what you've just described there, Mick, we call meditation. And meditation is one of if you YouTube meditation, you'll find our practice. And that's pretty much what we do. And we even do it in the classroom. And it's chaotic. It doesn't always work. And the kids have got to be up for it in a way. And you've also got to give kids the option not to do what I'm about to suggest. But actually, just if you can find a space that's big enough, and actually it depends how many kids you've got in your class, depends what classroom you're in, it depends whether you've got another space in the school you can use. But if you can just get them to lie on the floor and do exactly what you explained there, Mick, just starting with the toes, moving your attention up your body, and we try and get them to actually practice that. Even if you can't do that, the FOFBOT, feet on floor, bum on chair, it's like that. But it's very similar to what we call in mindfulness a body scan. And there's a seated body scan, a lying body scan. But if you can get them to actually do the lying down body scan, it's a great, they remember that. They really remember that because they feel the weight of the body on the floor, even if it's not their bed, even if it's some hard, uncomfortable floor and somebody's socks are smelling in the distance. It's still a space that they're in and they're lying down and they're noticing what's happening in their bodies.
Now, Richard, teachers are very busy, schools are very busy, there's lots on the curriculum. So if we suddenly go, you know what, this needs to be in every school all the time, they'll say, well, we'll never be able to fit this in. So let's sort of break that down in
Yeah.
terms of like, how can things like this be built into the routine of a school
Yeah.
so that it becomes part of the child's experience within school, that it doesn't take, stop you getting your maths grades and your science grades and so on and so forth. How do you recommend that these sorts of things are integrated with
Yeah.
into the sort of the school day?
Well, so first of all, I would say we're not advocating that it should be in every school because you need the right people in the right schools at the right time, if you like. If you don't have somebody in the school who's really passionate about mindfulness and really understands it, you can't force it on people. So you talked about building it from the bottom up. That's the way you need to build it from the bottom up. You need the support of the senior team, of course, but you also need somebody who is passionate about it. And kids can feel the passion of a teacher. They know when a teacher's making it up and doesn't care. Whereas if you've got a teacher who's actually there, who is clearly mindfulness has made a difference to their life, they will be able to communicate that. How do you do that? It will depend on where you are as a school, and we built a kind of pathways model on our website, which we hope helps people to identify kind of where they are, where their school is. If you can get it in some way to be part of your PSHE lessons, even if it's just one lesson, that would be great. If you can get it embedded within the PSHE structure of a school's curriculum, of a school's timetable, that would be even better. But not everyone can do that. And if you can't do that, then just giving what we call an opportunity to practice. Yeah. So voluntary, if you're interested in this, come here at break time, come here at lunchtime, come here after school, come here before school. Little moments when people can come and listen and have a go at what you're offering. That's how that passionate person can bring it to the school. You could argue that it should be, in the beginning of every lesson, at the end of every lesson. And I think that can work, and it can work particularly well with younger children in primary. Yeah. Because they're more up for it. They're not as, what's the word? Adolescents are programmed to challenge. They're programmed for very good evolutionary reasons not to do what the adults tell them to do. So you need to get buy-in from adolescents if you're going to start a lesson with some quiet or end it with some quiet. But with younger kids, you don't necessarily, and we've got curriculum for different age groups. It doesn't necessarily have to be a course. It doesn't have to be necessarily taught in the same way that PSHE is. And just when they get back from the playground, giving them an opportunity just to sit still, just to feel their breathing, just to feel their feet on the floor, having explained to them, this is what the brain's doing. This is why you're feeling, a bit hyperactive after you've come back from the playground. Let's try this. And then you can weave it into the fabric of the lessons a little bit more without it being, in inverted commas, on timetable. I'm a secondary teacher, so I'm more familiar with the model of, finding ways to fit it into a school day. But with the younger you go, the easier it is to weave it into the fabric of what you're doing.
Can I ask you whether the 15 years or so since you guys have been sort of operating the work that you've done, you have got the opportunity to measure results? Are there sort of, because of course schools will say, well, what's the bottom line around this? Not in terms of the cost of bringing something in, but in terms of what do I get from it? Are you seeing things which are measurable? I am aware that in this kind of world that sometimes you don't see the benefits of these things until much further down the line. You suddenly, when you're 28, realize, oh, actually, I do know a lot of mindful techniques because I used to do them at school. I'll start doing them again. That benefit will come. Is there a measure that's a bit more short term?
This could be a whole, not just another interview, Mick, but a PhD in its own right. Yes and no. There's lots of evidence of, there's different ways of looking at evidence. There's tons of evidence in what we call the adult world about the effectiveness of mindfulness in different contexts. There's lots of evidence I'm always careful what I say here because I think it's really important to be clear and honest. there is plenty of encouraging evidence in schools that when mindfulness is taught well by people who are trained well, by people who know what it is, in good settings, it can bring all sorts of benefits in terms of well-being, what we call executive function, um, sort of moving people away out of sort of reactivity or what we call oppositional behavior. Lots of examples of that in smaller managed trials, which can often be what we call randomized control trials. So they have greater integrity as pieces of research. However, what there's also been is research that tells us very clearly that you can't suddenly, it's not a silver bullet. You can't suddenly go, bang, let's put this in schools and have great results. That doesn't work. When we have research that tells us that that doesn't work, it's completely in line with what we'd expect, to be honest. You can't say to some, a maths teacher who has no interest in mindfulness, begin your lesson with this, please. They're going to go, well, no. Or if they do, they're going to go, kids, I've been told to do this. You've got to really believe what you're doing. But it also takes practice. I've been doing this for many years. I'm still a beginner. Do you know what I mean? That we talk about beginner's mind. Every lesson is different. Every class is different. And I swear I'm still learning ways to connect differently with different groups in different contexts. So it does take time. The evidence that is more salient is actually, and the quicker fix, if you like, is actually the benefits it brings to the teachers, which is interesting because they will only do it if they volunteer to do it, as opposed to being asked to do it in period 2 on a Tuesday. They've actually chosen to have a go at mindfulness and want to learn it. And what we see is the impact on them can be very strong very quickly, which is in line with adult mindfulness research, where if you practice for 20 minutes a day, half an hour a day, that's a reasonable amount of practice, even after 8 weeks you see a measurable benefit. Some quite famous research on that.
And presumably those teachers who then have adopted that, who then feel more equipped or better equipped to take on maybe some of the challenges that are facing with the classroom, that obviously then has an impact on those children because they're dealing with a teacher who isn't quite as snappy, who maybe sees a slightly bigger picture. And I guess that makes a difference to them. Can I ask you, Richard, though, in terms of like the challenges that face teachers? I'm married to a teaching assistant in a primary school reception class. So we sort of at the coal face really of maybe some of the issues. But I speak to teachers, all the time. And they'll talk about, the behavioral issues that they're dealing with, but also maybe the inequality issues that they're dealing with parents who have no interest in their child's education or their involvement in school life. The neurodiversity issues that, that disrupt the traditional classroom, but obviously have to be adopted, often undiagnosed at the same time. Now, we've already said that mindfulness isn't a single bullet, but can mindfulness play its part in each of those sort of different environments to face different challenges that teachers face and that children are obviously facing as well?
You've touched on a huge number of issues there, Mick. Behavioral issues, neurodiversity, EDI. There's a lot of different stuff in what you said there, and some quite profound stuff, if I may say. The answer is again yes and no. It definitely can work with all of those groups, if you like, that you've mentioned. Whether it can work with all of them at the same time is a different question. Whether you need to work with smaller groups in, let's talk about sort of neurodiversity. If you can work with a smaller group of neurodiverse children, it is obviously going to have, you can talk to them more immediately than you can if you're trying to work with them in a context of 30 kids in the class. It doesn't mean you can't work with them in the class, but again, you need to know how to do that, and that's part of our training. And my experience, I don't know, Nick, how that plays out if you're a teaching assistant in a reception or a year 1 class in a primary school. I know in a secondary how if I have a child with quite strong ADHD and we're trying to do a practice, I know how to give that child options. I cannot expect them simply to sit still. But actually, if if we talk about that beforehand, or if I know that if they simply move, or they play with some sort of fidget toy, or if they put their head on their desk, or if they tap their legs, or there's lots of, if they stand, if they move, if you give them permission to move in ways where if you've got a good relationship with that child, they'll respect that they don't want to disturb everyone else necessarily. But if they don't trust you and you don't trust them, it becomes a disciplinary and a behavioral thing, that's going to be hard. That's going to be difficult. And I think if you try and use mindfulness for discipline, that is where, let's use mindfulness because it will have a positive impact on behavior. I'm less comfortable with that. I think that can be an outcome, but kids also know when you're trying to manipulate them and get them to do something so that they behave better. They're bright. They can see through teachers. They have good, what I call a BS radar. They know why you're doing what you're doing more often than you might think.
With that in mind, then, Richard, and a classroom is a microcosm of society and adult life as well. For people listening to this in general society, I guess it points that picture that mindfulness, you have to find your own route into it. I guess that you might try meditation, whatever it is, and you might just think I can't connect to this, or I can't. But actually, there might be something else around knitting, around mindful walking, around gardening. I always use gardening as a good example, where you can find your mindfulness in there as well. So in terms of that, what should people look for in an activity or a thing that they're doing that they might already be doing that actually alerts them to the fact that they might be actually something that you consider to be mindful? And they might go, I always feel better after I've had a good hour reading a book. And you think, well, yeah, because there's something mindful in that as well. But they would go, well, I feel better because I've been reading a book. But there's a mindfulness in there as well. There is an education that we probably need to get out there about what mindfulness is and how it can play its part in a whole host of different things.
Yeah. And again, I think there's a few things you've touched on there. One is that there is a sort of step after that, which is why are you doing mindfulness? And what we always talk about, it's about possibilities. Why do you want to do this? Some people it might be for their academic progress. Some people it might be for their taking that penalty in football. Other people it might be not hitting their sibling when they've stolen their PlayStation controller. There could be lots of reasons why you want to do it. But in terms of being mindful in the present, yes, any activity which is the word I often use is kind of absorbing, that really absorbs you in, doing a jigsaw puzzle, or you mentioned knitting, and obviously you've got Tom Daly and people who have been great exemplars of people who just do something like knitting to kind of keep their mind focused. But yes, reading, gaming is quite an interesting one. Programming, coding, writing, journaling, those sorts of things, drawing, physical exercise is just incredibly important. Just anything, football, going on a run, basketball, whatever you do that is physical is immensely absorbing and one of the best things you could possibly do. And I guess, to a slight sidetrack, one of the things that I feel is such a shame, and I guess you remember when the Olympics came out and they said, sport, we're going to bring sport into all the schools and it's really going to be a success, and nothing really happened there. And that was such a shame, because there's something very mindful about physical activity. But I think anything which absorbs you and keeps you present with what you're doing and pulls you away from worrying about the past or worrying about the future has an aspect of mindfulness to it.
No, absolutely. For schools who are sort of maybe played around with this, or if there are members of school staff who are passionate about mindfulness and want to sort of find out what the opportunities are through organizations like yours, what's that sort of connection point like? What should they do?
Well, please go to our website, mindfulnessinschools.org, and you will, and there's the pathways framework there that can tell you what you can do. But I would say start by learning it yourself. You can do that we run a course called .begin. Almost for the time you just forget the kids, learn it for yourself. And we have a course called .begin, which teaches that over 8 weeks online. And I think there is nothing better than And I say face-to-face, even over technology like we're meeting here, Mick, it's amazing how much teaching you can do. So do a course taught by a person if you can. But if you can't do that, the apps that are out there as an introduction are still really, they're still a great place to start. Headspace, Calm, 10% Happier, Waking Up. These are all, the Oxford Mindfulness Foundation has just come out with their own website, which has got some practices on. There's a lot of stuff out there. But I would say that there does come a point where teaching yourself via an app is okay, but go on a course. If you can, go on a course. And depending on the school that you're working in, we also have supported assisted places, depending on the percentage of free school meals in your school. So it might be that you don't even have to pay for it. It depends, or at least we can subsidize some of that. But begin if you can by learning it, being taught it by another person.
No, absolutely. And it's, we said, it's not a silver bullet, but it can enhance your own understanding of yourself and the world around you. Naturally, that sort of feeds out into the classroom. And of course, if it makes a difference for the children as well, then that's huge. Also, skills for life, I would say, Richard, as well. That's the other thing.
And Mick, can I just say one more thing? Just to go back to what you said, maybe it's not the right time for you to do that course, but maybe it is just, returning to that cup of tea, the gardening, the knitting, the walking the dog, those remain really fundamentally important moments to take for yourself, for your own well-being, regardless of whether you have the time and feel you're in the right space to do a mindfulness course.
Absolutely. Richard, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you speaking to us.
You're welcome. Good to see you, mate. Take care.
Thank you. And we will put links to Mindfulness in Schools project in the podcast notes as well, so you can find out some more information. And we'll have more very soon here on Mental Health Monday. I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.